Founded just 3 years after the Civil War ended, First Presbyterian Church in Evanston has endured and thrived through profound changes in our society and the church. Now, this Evanston institution is celebrating its 150th anniversary. For a look at the church's past and future, let's welcome Rev Raymond Hilton, First Presbyterian Church's senior pastor. Welcome, Reverend Hilton.
Well, thank you, Jack.
And congratulations on this 150th anniversary of the congregation.
Thank you. It's a profound accomplishment.
What events do you have planned to celebrate this milestone?
Well, I think I should say, before I even answer that question, is to give huge kudos to our 150th committee. They actually started planning for this event 2 years ago in 2016, and they've done a fabulous job. We had a huge community concert back in July of this year, and we estimated maybe close to 500-600 people showed up for that on a Friday night. Then the very next night, we had a huge banquet at the Doubletree Hotel, and that was also filled to capacity. And then the following day on Sunday, of course, we had a massive service with a lunch that followed. We had an arts festival because our church is filled with a lot of talented artists and writers and the creative types. And so a lot of that work was displayed throughout our church for over a month.
Tell us what the church and Evanston were like or what you know they were like in 1868.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, of course, I wasn't there.
Of course.
But a lot of the history that I've read would suggest that Evanston at that time was even being called like a village, because it was just a small community. It was founded by very wealthy, if I could say, Methodist men who bought property. And some of that property was initially donated to Northwestern University, of course. But then Northwestern donated property to us to start our church. And when the church was started back in 1868, they maybe had about 30 members coming. They were meeting in a log cabin that initially burnt to the ground. They built a second one, and the second one burnt to the ground. And then we built the current edifice that we have out of the limestone structure that we have. The community, of course, at that time was not as diverse as it is now. And I also think back then, you know, it was much more of a stable bedroom community. It's not now. Evanston today is a much more mobile community. People come for school or work, and they're there for a few years and they move on. But there's been dramatic changes over the years.
What do you think would surprise First Presbyterian's founders about their church today?
Well, I mean, one thing I would start with is the building itself. I mean, what they remember would be they had this log cabin, and now here we have this sprawling set of buildings that take up pretty much a whole block. I think they would be surprised at the diversity of the church. I think they'd be surprised to see somebody like me as the senior pastor of the church. We have a wall in one of our rooms that has pictures. I'm the 12th pastor, and all of the pastors dating back to 1868 would have been Caucasian men. And here I am, a Jamaican, sitting in that seat. So I think they'd be surprised at that. They'd be surprised at the busyness of our church today. We have a church that sometimes I feel like we're doing too much. And maybe back then it would have been a simpler sort of focused approach to the life of the church. But today there's a lot going on. We have a school for children. We have a counseling center for people both in the community and the church who need psychological support. So yes, I think they would be surprised to see just the richness and the in some ways the complexity of what we're doing today as opposed to back in the earlier days.
So how do you make church relevant to, say, the millennial generation, which often rejects organized religion?
Right. And that's a really important question, Jackie. I think for us, one of the things we won't do, we really won't pander. We won't be a consumerist type church where we're going to have all the glitz and the dazzle to try to pull people in. Because I think at its core, whether you're a millennial, you are from the builder generation, the boomer generation, I think at its core, as human beings, we're looking for community. And I always tell people, when people go to a church, they're looking for friends. And so what we try to create within our church is what we call a warm environment, so that whether you're a child or a young adult or a college age or an older person, when people walk in, they want to know that it feels authentic. There's hospitality, there's friendship. And of course, I think some of the programming that we do, it needs to have some relevance. For example, we hired a young adult pastor, young adult, young families pastor, Pastor Henry Coates. And Henry, what he's doing is creating community. He's bringing that generation together. And I think some of those things are helping to say to this younger generation that the church isn't a perfect place, but at its core, it's a warm, inviting place. It's a place where you can find support. It's a place where we'll celebrate with you, we'll grieve with you, where you'll have friends. And I think when people experience that, they want to stick around, they want to come back. And that's what we're finding.
How else does First Presbyterian Church reach out to the community and to the wider world?
Yeah, that's a real priority for us. We have what we call a simple mission statement, and the mission statement goes something like this: to know, follow, and serve Christ. And that last one, serve, is really an important thing for us. Our church has had a long history with an organization just south of us called Good News Partners. It was actually started by a PhD student from Northwestern over 40 years ago, and we were one of their first partners. And Good News Partners is an organization that tries to end homelessness and hunger on the North Shore. Believe it or not, it's there. We also work with Good News Partners with an offshoot organization called New Life Center, and it ministers to homeless families, moms and kids who are on the streets. And so we send people in to tutor, to provide just a variety of services. We have people from our church on the board. We work with an organization too, and it's around the United States. It's called Rebuilding Together. And every year, we have a pretty huge contingent of folks from our church who link arms with Rebuilding Together, and we go into the community and refurbish homes. For over 30 years, we've had I don't like to use the word a soup kitchen, we call it Super Saturday. And we have our guests coming in for over 30 plus years, every Saturday, serving a meal, providing clothing, providing opportunities for people who want to sort of transition from where they are to somewhere else. So we partner with other organizations in Evanston, whether it's around job, skills training, or preparing for job interviews. We do all of that. We work, the newest thing that we're doing these days is with a ministry called First Friends. And it's just the reality. Because of all the turmoil in the world, the wars that are going on, we're seeing people being displaced by violence and wars, and lots of refugees are coming to Evanston, coming to Chicago. And our First Friends ministry it's really about hospitality and welcoming these families. And so we pair up a family with friends from First Pres. We just had a big Thanksgiving dinner yesterday for these First Friend families. And that's a ministry that just gives a lot of joy to people, because there's this stigma, this very, very bad stereotype that people have about Muslims, and the assumption that if you're Muslim, you must be violent. And so a lot of these folks come to America not knowing who's my friend, who can I trust? Yeah. And First Pres is, among many other groups, are out there saying, we welcome you, and to provide that kind of rich hospitality.
What do you see for First Presbyterian's future?
Well, let me go back to that strategic plan that I told you about. I've been encouraging the congregation, let's celebrate the 150 years and how wonderful it is to have come this far. But we want to now think about the next 5, 10, 15 years, where we want to see the church going. So we're literally going through a strategic planning process to kind of dream about where we want our church to go. And it could be anything from, we want to see our church giving birth to other congregations in other parts of the city of Chicago. We want to see our church growing even at a greater pace numerically. We want to see our church taking on a greater sense of ownership in the community. In other words, the danger that we face as a mainline congregation is that we can become so in love with ourselves instead of seeing the opportunities in the community. And so part of my dream is that we would be able to raise up what I call next generation leaders who will see themselves serving outside the four walls of the church, serving in the community. And that's one of the big dreams that I have for the future of our church.
Well, thank you for joining us, Reverend Hilton, and our best wishes to you and the congregation as you celebrate in the months ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm Jackie Marquez for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.